Make this the best Halloween ever by pre-ordering my 2 brand new books coming out soon. The first is Phantom Phenomena, a hand-picked collection of the all-time scariest stories I've ever received, accompanied by atmospheric illustrations and field notes. Then there's Appalachian Folklore, an extraordinary catalog of the chilling history, creepy folklore, and rich culture of the Appalachians. These release October 15th and 8th, respectively. Pre-order now on Amazon and Barnes & Noble. But hurry, because the first 100 pre-orders to verify via the link in the description or at eeriecast.com/verify will receive an exclusive hoodie and hardcover copy of Lore, a folklore horror novel.
Hi, welcome to Dead and Roasted. What can I get you?
I remember riding the bus every year of my gosh darn school career. It was awful. The kids in the back were engaging in all sorts of degeneracy. The kids up front were quiet and always watching through the big mirror above the driver. And some kids smelled like old bacon on every single bus. Was it the same kid? I don't know. Well, friends, come on back and join me for my break, because I have a load of scary school stories to share with you, featuring janitors regretting their career path and teachers who just don't get paid enough. If you have a scary work story, you can put it in the submission box. It's at the front of the store, eeriecast.com/submit. And consider leaving some positive feedback for me by rating the show on Spotify and Apple. These are tales from the break room. Janitor versus Ghosts from Bribey League. I'm not going to name the high school where this happened, not trying to get sued or anything. Let's just say it's a big brick building somewhere in the Midwest, the kind of place you've seen 1,000 times if you've ever driven through small-town America. I'm the night janitor there, or I was until about a month ago. I quit that job faster than a cat on a hot tin roof after what happened. Still gives me the shivers when I think about it. It all started on a Tuesday night in October. Football season was in full swing, and the halls were plastered with these garish homecoming posters, all glitter and school spirit. I was making my usual rounds, starting with the science wing, like I always did. I just finished mopping outside the chemistry lab when I heard it, a slow, methodical squeak of chalk on a blackboard. Now that's not too weird on its own. Teachers do work late sometimes. But it was almost midnight, and I knew for a fact I'd locked up every classroom an hour back. I stood there for a minute, mop dripping on the freshly cleaned floor, straining my ears. The sound was coming from 217, clear as day. I knocked gently, figuring maybe a teacher had snuck back in somehow. Hello? Anyone still working in there? The squeaking stopped dead. I waited, but there was no answer. Just silence. My hand was shaking a bit as I turned the handle, but I pushed the door open anyway. Janitors can't be scared of empty rooms, right? Except this room wasn't exactly empty. The lights were off, but I could see well enough from the hallway. And there, on the big blackboard at the front of the room, was a half-finished chemical equation. The chalk dust was still settling in the air. That's when I began to speed walk away from there, mop and bucket forgotten. It wasn't until I was safely in the janitor's closet, door locked behind me, that I started to try to make sense of what I'd seen. Maybe a teacher had been in there earlier, and I just hadn't noticed. But I always check every room before I start cleaning. And I'm telling you, that dust was fresh. Whatever or whoever wrote that equation was there only moments before I opened the door. Where could they have gone? I managed to calm myself down enough to finish my shift, but I steered clear of room 217 for the rest of the night. Forced myself to believe I'd simply imagined it. Maybe I was tired, more tired than I'd thought. But then it happened again, and again, always in the science wing, always late at night, when the school should have been empty except for me. Sometimes it was the sound of chalk, sometimes Bunsen burners firing up out of nowhere, which can be dangerous. Once, I swear I heard the gleeful pop of a successful chemical reaction of some kind, followed by what sounded like kids' laughter. I thought about quitting then. I really did. But where else was I going to find steady work at my age? So I stuck it out, trying to ignore this weirdness as best I could. It all came to a head about a month ago. I was cleaning the gym, headphones in, trying to drown out the usual nighttime creaks and groans of the building. That's when I felt it, a tap on my shoulder, as light as a feather. I spun around so fast, heart pounding, but there was no one there, just empty bleachers and the faint smell of old sweat socks. As I turned back to my mop, movement caught my eye. There on the far wall was a perfect shadow of a person, I kid you not, tall and thin, like a teenager, hand raised as if it had just tapped me on the shoulder. But there was no one else in that room to cast a shadow like that. I watched frozen as the shadow figure seemed to notice me staring. It waved, all casual-like, then walked along the wall towards the locker rooms. Just before it disappeared around the corner, I swear that thing turned and looked right at me. I could feel its eyes on me, even if it was just a shadow. And then, it was gone. Truth be told, I hightailed it out of there so fast, I nearly tripped over my own mop bucket. I didn't stop running until I was in my car, doors locked. I called in sick the next day, and the day after that. When I finally dragged myself back to work, I half expected the place to be crawling with ghosts. But it was just the same old school, same scuffed floors and flickering fluorescents. That would be my last week there. I quit right after, told him I found a better job. Couldn't bring myself to explain what really happened. No one was gonna believe me. Sometimes I drive by that school late at night, and I swear I see shadows moving in the windows. Maybe it's my imagination, maybe it's my memories coming back to literally haunt me. But if you ever find yourself working nights in an old high school, and you hear something that doesn't quite fit, well, I recommend you don't go investigate. Some things are better left alone. Problem Student. From Judy M. Let me tell you about the scariest year I've ever had in my entire teaching career. This all went down at a certain high school. I'll just refer to it as Sycamore Valley. Not its real name, but I'd like to keep it anonymous. I've been teaching high school English for over 10 years. Most days it's your typical teenage drama. Who's dating who, complaints about homework, those sorts of things. But this one kid, he was something else entirely. It started in the fall semester. New batch of 10th graders, same old routine. I noticed this one boy right off the bat. Let's call him Eddie. Eddie was a skinny kid and pale as a ghost, with these intense dark eyes that never seemed to blink. First day of class, he sits right in the front row and stares at me the whole time. And he's not taking notes, not looking at the board, just staring right at me. At first, I figured he was just shy. Maybe he had some kind of social issue. I've had plenty of awkward students before. But as the weeks went on, things only got more strange. When we had essay assignments, and Eddie turned his in, they were disturbing to say the least. For example, we might write about The Great Gatsby, and he would turn in these graphic descriptions of car crashes, focusing mostly on the blood and guts. Or when we were analyzing poetry, his interpretations always turned to death and decay. I tried to talk to him about it, but he would smile this eerie little smile and tell me, "I'm just being creative, Mr. Johnson. Isn't that what you want?" Then, the incident started. One day I found a dead bird on my desk, just lying there, its neck twisted all the way around. When I asked the class about it, Eddie piped up, "Maybe it flew in through the window, Mr. Johnson, and crashed right into the board. Nature can be so cruel, don't you think?" Another time, I caught him following me to my car after school. When I confronted him, he said he was just going the same way. But I swear, I saw him duck behind a tree when I looked back. The other students started to notice too. They'd avoid sitting near him, whispering when he walked by. I overheard one girl say she saw him dissecting a frog behind the gym, not for biology class, but just for fun. I tried talking to the principal about it, but without concrete evidence of wrongdoing, there wasn't much they could do. "Boys will be boys," they said. "He's probably just going through a phase." It all came to a head in the spring semester. We were studying Lord of the Flies, and I guess something about that book really resonated with Eddie. He began to come to class with these weird makeshift tribal outfits, war paint on his face, carrying a crudely made spear, which obviously we confiscated, and I nearly had him suspended then, but we didn't get that far. I think the other staff just felt sorry for him. The final straw was the day of our class presentation. Each student had to give a talk about the themes in the book. When it was Eddie's turn, he walked up to the front of the class, looked right at me, and said, "The book is about savagery, Mr. Johnson. Let me show you what I think that word means." Then he pulled out a knife. I don't know where he got it or how he snuck it into the school. All I know is one second he was standing there, and the next he was lunging at me, knife glinting in the lights. I managed to dodge away, just barely. The knife caught my shirt, tearing it open. The class erupted into chaos, screaming, desks scraping and squealing across the floor as kids scrambled to get away. Eddie was laughing the whole time it happened, swinging the knife around like it was some big joke. "Come on, Mr. Johnson," he kept yelling. "Don't you want to be a part of my tribe?" The short time I was dodging his attacks felt like forever, but finally, security guards burst in. They tackled Eddie, grabbing the knife away from him. As they were dragging him out, he kept staring at me, that same eerie smile on his face. "I'll see you again, Mr. Johnson," he said, just before they pulled him through the door. "I don't think you understand." Eddie was expelled, at long last. Last I heard, he was in some juvenile detention center upstate. This experience was intense and scary, to be honest. But I didn't quit. When I was tempted to, right after this happened, I started to think about all the other kids. The ones who were good and needed a good teacher. The ones who didn't try to reenact Lord of the Flies in real life. So I stayed, and I'm still here now. But God help me if I find another dead bird on my desk. The Man at the Dumpsters, from Mr. Baubles. When you work as a resource officer, over the years, you see and deal with a lot of things. Fights, drugs, the occasional weapon. Standard stuff for a junior high. But this particular experience shook me to my core. I haven't told many people about it, but it feels good to finally type it out. It was a Tuesday in late October. The weather had just started to turn that crisp autumn chill air that everyone loves. I remember because I was thinking about breaking out my heavier jacket for patrol. I was doing my usual rounds after the final bell. Most of the kids had cleared out by then. Just a few stragglers waiting for late buses or hanging around for clubs. Our school, I'll refer to it as Westfield Junior High, not its real name in case you're wondering, is a sprawling campus with multiple buildings. You've got your main building, then separate ones for the gym, cafeteria, and arts programs. Between all these buildings are these little alleyways. Perfect spots, unfortunately, for kids to sneak off to and cause trouble. That's why I always make sure to check them thoroughly during my patrols. So there I was, walking down the narrow path between the main building and the cafeteria. It's about 50 feet long, lined with dumpsters on one side and the brick wall of the cafeteria on the other. Not the most pleasant spot. Always smells like old milk and whatever mystery meat they served that day. I was about halfway down when I heard it. This shuffling noise coming from behind one of the dumpsters. Now, usually this means one of two things. Either some animal's gotten into the trash, or we've got some kids where they shouldn't be. Either way, it's my job to check it out. "Hello?" I called out, one hand resting on my belt, close to where my taser was. "Anyone back here? Come on out where I can see ya." The shuffling stopped for a second, then started up again, louder this time. And then, well, things got a little weird. The figure emerged from behind the dumpster, and at first I thought it was just some homeless guy who'd wandered into campus. He was tall, maybe 6'4", and rail thin, wearing these tattered clothes that looked like they'd been pulled out of the dumpster he was hiding behind. His hair was long and matted, hanging down over his face. "Sir," I said, trying to keep my voice calm and authoritative. "This is private property. Gonna have to ask you to leave." That's when he looked up at me, and I swear my blood ran cold. His face, it wasn't right. The proportions were all off, like someone had tried to mold human features onto a shape that wasn't quite human to begin with. His eyes were too big, set too far apart, and his mouth was just a little too wide, stretching nearly from ear to ear. And his skin, it had this waxy, almost translucent quality, like you could see something moving underneath it, looking too closely. For a long moment, we just stared at each other. I could feel my heart beating hard in my chest, my hand tightening around my belt. Every instinct was screaming at me to run away, but I stood my ground. I'm a trained officer. I've dealt with plenty of strange individuals before. Even so, nothing could have prepared me for what happened next. The man, not sure if he really was one after this, opened his mouth and spoke. But the voice that came out, it wasn't just one. It was like a chorus of voices, all speaking slightly out of sync. High and low pitches, young and old, all layered on top of each other. "Officer." I took an involuntary step back. "Sir, I'm gonna need you to put your hands where I can see them and step out from behind that dumpster." He tilted his head to the side, like a sort of curious dog. The movement was too fluid, almost serpentine. "Officer, we're already out. We're all out now. Don't you see us?" As he spoke, I swear I saw movement behind him. Shadows moving about, shifting and stretching, taking on vaguely human shapes before melting back into formlessness. I blinked hard, convinced my eyes had to be playing tricks on me. "Sir, I'm not going to ask you again. Step out from behind the dumpster and keep your hands where I can see him." The man's too wide mouth stretched into an even wider grin. "Of course, officer. We'll come out. All of us." And then, God, I still have trouble believing what I saw next. The man started to move forward, but as he did, he seemed to unfold. It was like watching a piece of origami come undone, but in reverse. His limbs elongated, stretching to impossible lengths. His torso split and divided, new appendages sprouting like grotesque branches. In a matter of seconds, what had been one man became a writhing mass of limbs and torsos, all connected in ways that defied anatomy and physics. I turned and sprinted back towards the main building, my heart aching in shock. I could hear something behind me, like a cacophony of footsteps, some heavy and plodding, others quick and light, and those voices still spoke nonsense in an unsettling chorus. I made it to the main door of the building and fumbled my keys. My hands were shaking very badly, and it took me a moment to find the right one to the lock. Just as I heard the click of the door unlocking, something cold and damp brushed against the back of my neck. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I threw myself through the door and slammed it shut behind me. When I made sure it was locked, I became dizzy, and I blacked out. When I came to, it was after dark, and I was absolutely certain that everyone was gone besides me. Wasn't sure how no one found me on the floor. Just my luck, I guess. But remembering what I saw, I ran straight to the main office. I had to deactivate the alarm, which someone had set for me, apparently. I reviewed the security camera footage myself. The camera covering that alley showed nothing. I swear to God, all it showed was me alone in that alley, looking into it for a moment before walking away completely fine. In the days that followed, I tried to tell myself that I had simply hallucinated. I had some kind of episode, that what I saw wasn't real. How could it be? The camera showed me otherwise. But something just isn't right. I requested some time off with my vacation days. I got them, taking a week for myself, and that did seem to make all the difference. When I came back, everything seemed normal, felt normal. Kids were going to class, teachers were teaching, life was back to how it should be. But that experience stuck with me. If you are a school resource officer, or really anyone who works in a school, my best advice would be to stay alert, keep your eyes wide open, and beware any individuals with multiple voices. After Hours, from Grier S. I don't usually take last-minute sub-jobs, but when Mrs. Kaplan called me at 6 a.m. begging me to cover her classes, I caved. She and I go way back, and she sounded desperate. What I didn't know was that I would be staying well past the final bell, and that would leave me dealing with some seriously messed up stuff. The day itself was pretty standard. The kids were bored. I gave some pop quizzes, which they were frustrated with. The usual. But as I was packing up to leave, the principal practically cornered me. Turns out, Mrs. Kaplan had some urgent paperwork that needed to be finished and turned in before tomorrow. And since I couldn't come back in the morning, I had to do it for her tonight. So there I was, stuck in an empty classroom at 5 p.m., sifting through a mountain of forms. That school felt different after hours. Too quiet and too still. Every little sound seemed amplified and made me jump a bit. Around 6:30, I heard the first weird noise. It sounded like a desk scraping across the floor, coming from the classroom next door. I figured it was probably the janitor, but when I poked my head out to say hi, the hallway was empty. I went back to work, trying to ignore the prickly feeling on the back of my neck. But then, it happened again, louder than before. Now it sounded like it was coming from the room directly above me. I tried to focus on the paperwork, but the noises kept coming. scraping desks, slamming lockers, even what sounded like someone writing something down. But every time I went to investigate, there was nothing. No janitors, no other teachers, no one else there. By 8 p.m., I was seriously freaked out. The noises had gotten more frequent and were coming from all over the building. I decided to pack up and finish the work at home. Principal's orders be darned. As I was shoving papers into my bag, the lights flickered. Once, twice, then went out completely. I fumbled for my phone, using its flashlight to navigate to the door. But when I tried the handle, it wouldn't budge. Somehow, it had been locked, and I was now locked in. I then began to hear footsteps. They were slow and heavy, coming down the hallway towards my classroom. My phone's weak flashlight beam shook as I pointed it at the door's window, waiting to see who was out there. The footsteps stopped right outside. I held my breath. Slowly, a face appeared in the window. But it wasn't a face, not really. It was pale and distorted, black holes where the eyes should be. Its mouth opened in a silent scream. I stumbled backward, tripping over a desk and dropping my phone. The room plunged into darkness. I could hear the door handle rattling violently, like something was trying to get in. Just as I was sure the door would burst open, the lights came back on. The rattling stopped. When I looked up, the hallway was empty. No creepy face, no footsteps. I barely remember getting out of there. I know I ran, leaving half the paperwork behind. But that wasn't my responsibility, especially when something like that happened. I just drove home. I nearly got fired from my substitution role, but I still do this for a living. For better or for worse. Completely Alone, from Michael V.G. I used to work as a day janitor at an elementary school that will go unnamed. The work is simple, but rough sometimes. Honestly, I miss being around those kids. Most days I would just be mopping up spills or unclogging toilets, the chosen hero of making sure the place doesn't fall apart. Back in March, though, something happened. Then again in June, and I'm still trying to make sense of it all. It was a Tuesday in early March. Just another normal day, I thought. We'd had an assembly that morning, an anti-bullying presentation. I was cleaning up the mess in the gym afterward. Kids, man. Give them an hour of free time and they'll turn any place into a disaster zone. I was there sweeping up popcorn kernels. Don't ask me why they thought popcorn at an assembly was a good idea. When I realized something was off. It was quiet. In a school full of elementary students, quiet isn't a word you often hear. This was different. It was like someone had hit the mute button on the whole darn building. A bit freaked out, I stepped out into the hallway. It was empty. Not just empty like everyone was back in class, but empty like abandoned. There were no kids running back from the library or bathroom. No teachers doing hall duty. Nothing. Just empty bulletin boards and rows of lockers. "Hello?" I called out, my voice echoing down the hall. No reply. I figured maybe it was a fire drill that I didn't know about, so I headed to the front office. No one there either. Miss Perez, the secretary who's been there even longer than me, is always at her desk, and I mean always. But now, her chair was empty, spinning slowly like someone had just gotten up. That's when the first chill ran down my spine. Something was wrong, very wrong. I pulled out my cell phone to make a call. I would call, I don't know, someone, anyone. The principal, maybe. But I didn't have a signal. Somehow, it wasn't low bars, not searching either, just nothing. Like my phone had turned into a fancy brick. I'd never seen it do that before. I then tried the landline in the office. It was dead. The computers were all on, screensavers floating across the screens, but the internet was down. By now, I was a little past freaking out. I jogged up and down the hallways, peeking into the classrooms, trying to find someone, just in case it was an elaborate prank. Though who would prank the janitor, I don't know. Room after room, the same thing. Desks neatly arranged, some with half-finished assignments still on them. Jackets were hanging on the backs of chairs. In Mrs. Thompson's first-grade class, there was a birthday crown sitting on one desk, candles on a cake next to it, unlit. It was like everyone simply vanished all at once, mid-sentence, mid-bite, mid-whatever. I make my way through the whole school. Cafeteria? Empty, with trays of food still steaming on the serving line. Library? Vacant, with books left open on the tables. Even the teacher's lounge was deserted, coffee cups still warm to the touch. I really began to panic then. I ran to the nearest exit and tried to push it open, and it didn't budge. I tried another. Same thing. Every single door in the place was locked. Not just locked, it's like they were a part of the wall. They didn't even rattle when I slammed into them. The windows were worse. I could see outside, cars in the parking lot, birds flying. But it was like there was an invisible wall. I punched it as hard as I can. Felt like hitting steel. My hand throbbed, but the window didn't even vibrate. I was trapped, alone in a school full of freaking ghosts. For the next hour, I wandered the halls in a daze. I kept expecting someone to jump out and yell surprise, but there was nothing. Just that buzz from the lights and the sound of my own ragged breathing. Then, as suddenly as it began, it was over. I round a corner, and one second I was alone in the hallway, the next I'm surrounded by kids and teachers, all looking at me like I've lost my mind. "Mr. Dave?" Little Sarah from second grade asked. "Why are you crying?" I looked down, and sure enough, my cheeks were wet. I didn't even realize I'd been crying. The rest of the day was a blur. I tried to explain what happened to the principal, but he looked concerned and suggested I take some time off. Nobody else remembered anything unusual. To them, it was just another day. I spent the next few months convinced I'd had some sort of psychotic episode. Even went to a doctor about it. Ended up getting some scans, but there was nothing out of place. A therapist I saw briefly told me it could have been stress-induced, but nothing truly explained what I experienced. Just as I was starting to think that maybe the therapist was right, maybe I imagined it all in some sort of stress-filled episode, something similar happens again. This time it happened the last week of school. The kids were wound up, ready for summer. I was cleaning up after a particularly messy art class. There was paint everywhere, like Jackson Pollock just sneezed all over the place. I was scrubbing at a stubborn blue splotch when that silence fell again, like a switch being flipped, from school chaos to immediately nothing. My stomach sank. I remember thinking, not again, please, not again, not me. But it was happening. The halls were empty again, classrooms abandoned, just as before. This time, though, I'm more ready. I pulled my phone out, prepared to record everything I saw. Except my phone was off and would not turn back on. I never came to school with my phone not charged, and I never just turned it off. I just set it to silent. I have no idea what happened to it. I began to make my way down the main hallway. I tried every door, every window, and then I see something. A flicker at first, at the edge of my vision. A shadow where there shouldn't have been one. I turned, and for a split second, I see someone. A figure, a dark silhouette, standing at the end of the hall. It was human-shaped, but also very wrong. A little too tall and a little too thin. "Hello?" I called out. "Can you hear me?" The figure didn't respond. It stood there, seemingly watching me, though I couldn't see any eyes just yet. Slowly, so slowly, it does start to move. Not walking, really, rather gliding. It was coming towards me in a smooth, unnatural motion, and for a while I truly did think it was a shadow of something being cast on the wall. But as it got closer, I realized there was no source. This was something else. Every instinct screamed at me to run. But where would I go? The doors were locked, windows unbreakable. I was trapped in there with this shadow. Eventually, the lizard part of my brain took over. I ran away full speed, sprinting down the hallways, taking corners so quickly I nearly wiped out. All the while, I could feel that I wasn't alone anymore. That thing not really chasing me, but following me. Steady but relentless. I ended up in the cafeteria, ducking behind the serving counter. I was trying my best to keep the volume of my panting low, but I was sure it could still hear me. I waited to be found, but it didn't happen. At one point, I peered over the edge, slowly looking for any sign of the shadowy figure. But the cafeteria remained empty. Rows of tables and the smell of old milk. That's all that was there. I let out a shaky breath I'd been holding for a while, starting to think that I'd lost the thing. But then I felt a cold breath on the back of my neck. In one quick moment, I turn, scream, and see nothing but blackness. When I opened my eyes again, I was on the floor of the nurse's office. Mrs. Chen, the school nurse, and Mrs. Thompson, the first grade teacher, were leaning over me, looking very concerned. "Mr. Dave, can you hear me?" Mrs. Chen shined a light in my eyes. "You gave us quite a scare." I tried to sit up, but my head was spinning. "What happened?" I asked. Mrs. Thompson put a hand on my shoulder. "You fainted in the cafeteria. The lunch ladies found you and called us. Are you feeling okay?" I looked around wildly, ready to see the shadow figure lurking in a corner, but it was a normal school day. I could hear the kids laughing again, and I could smell those questionable tacos from the cafeteria. I don't know," I stammered. "It happened again, didn't it?" Mrs. Chen and Mrs. Thompson exchanged a look. The kind of look adults give each other when they know something is wrong, but they don't want to say it out loud. "Look, you hit your head pretty hard when you fell," Mrs. Chen said gently. "We need to be careful and make sure you don't have a concussion." They let me go for the day, telling me to go to the doctor and take it easy. I walked out to my car and just sat there for a long time. I couldn't bring myself to start the engine just yet. But when I finally started pulling out of the parking lot, I glanced back at the school. And for a second, I swear to you, I saw a tall, thin shadow standing in one of the second-floor windows. I was done. I floored it, tires squealing as I peeled out of there. When I got home, I locked the doors and drew the blinds. I quit that job, terrified at the idea of it happening again, and what else I might see during such an episode. To this day, I work at my friend's automotive shop, and I haven't had a single weird experience yet. So maybe it wasn't me. Maybe it was that school. Detention. From Jerry Garadelli. I teach high school English, and I've seen my fair share of weird stuff. I mean, it's eventually going to happen when you teach teenagers. They can be stranger than fiction sometimes. But what happened one Tuesday wasn't teenage weirdness. It was something else entirely. The high school I work at sits right on the edge of a forest. It's a massive stretch of wilderness that goes on for miles, full of old-growth trees and who knows what else. Most of the time, it's a nice view from the classroom windows. I had detention duty that afternoon. Not my favorite part of the job, but someone has to do it. We had 4 kids in the room that day. Mike, a sophomore with a chip on his shoulder. Alicia, a quiet junior who never caused trouble. First-time offender, that one. Trevor, our resident class clown. And Samantha, a senior who looked like she'd rather be anywhere else. It was about 4:30 p.m., and the sun was already starting to set, thanks to those short autumn days. The kids were doing their homework, or at least pretending to, and I was grading papers, the standard stuff. Then we heard something, a scratching sound coming from the windows. At first I thought the wind was manipulating one of the tree branches, but it got louder and persistent. It was like someone was trying to claw their way in. Mike was the first to react. "Mr. G, you hear that, right? What the heck is that?" he asked, half rising from his seat, but heck wasn't what he said. "Language, Mr. Peterson," I said automatically, but my heart wasn't in it. I was too busy staring at the windows now, trying to see if I could make out what was making the awful noise. The scratching got louder and more frantic, until we heard a thump, like something heavy had slammed against the glass. Alicia screamed a little, and even tough guy Mike looked ready to run. I stood up, trying to project some calmness that I definitely didn't personally feel. "Everyone stay in your seats," I said, moving towards the windows. The blinds were down, but slivers of fading daylight peeked through. As I reached for the cord to raise them, the scratching suddenly stopped. For a moment, it was quiet. Could have heard a pin drop. Then Trevor said in a shaky voice, "Mr. G, maybe we shouldn't." But I was already pulling the cord. The blinds went up with a snap, revealing nothing. Just the empty school grounds and the dark line of trees. I sighed. "See," I said, turning back to the class. "Just some animal, nothing to worry about." The kids weren't convinced. Heck, I wasn't convinced either, but what else was I going to say? I went back to my desk and picked up the radio we used to communicate with security. "Hey, Ramirez, you there?" After a moment of static, a voice crackled through. "Oh, hey, Mr. G, go ahead." We just had some kind of disturbance outside room 237. Could you do a check?" 10-4, I'll take a look and report back to you." I put the radio down and tried to get back to grading, but I could feel 4 pairs of eyes staring at me. The kids were scared, and I was a little creeped out. After the longest 5 minutes, the radio crackled again. "All clear out here, Mr. G. No signs of any disturbance. Want me to come in?" Part of me wanted to say yes, to have another adult in the room, but I didn't want to freak the kids out even more. "Negative. We're fine. Thanks, Ramirez." I looked up at the class, forcing a smile. "See? Nothing to worry about. Now let's get back to..." Samantha's scream cut me off. She was on her feet, pointing at the window, her face pale. "Oh my God!" I spun around, my heart in my throat. For a split second, I saw it. Something big, something hairy. It ran past the windows. It was quite tall. It moved with a speed that nothing that size should have been capable of. Then, like that, it was gone, vanished into the growing dark outside. The room erupted into chaos. Alicia was crying, Mike was swearing up a storm, and Trevor looked like he was about to throw up. Samantha just stood there, still pointing out the window, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. I had to get control of the situation. "Everyone calm down!" I shouted, surprised at how steady my voice sounded. "It was probably just a bear or something. Sometimes they come down from the mountains." "That was no freaking bear, Mr. G," Mike said, saying the other F word, his voice cracking. Bears don't run that fast on two legs. Language, Mr. Peterson, I said again, this time with feeling. And you don't know what you saw. It's getting dark out there. Your eyes can play tricks on you. I didn't believe a word I was saying. But what choice did I have? I couldn't very well tell them that yes, we'd seen some kind of monster straight out of a horror film. I made a snap decision. All right, listen up. Detention's over early today, but I held up a hand as they all jumped to their feet. Those of you who have to wait for a ride will wait in the entryway, and no one leaves the building alone, understood? They nodded, eager to get out of the room, but not quite ready to face whatever might be waiting outside. I herded them down to the entryway, my eyes darting to every window we passed. I was afraid to see something pressing its awful face against the glass, but there was nothing. Once the kids were safely in the entryway, I radioed Ramirez again. Hey, we're calling it early tonight. Can you keep an eye on the front until all the students are picked up? Sure thing, Mr. G. Everything okay? I hesitated. Didn't know what to say. Yeah, everything's fine. Just been a long day. I waited until all the kids were safely picked up. The ones that had their own cars, I walked with them, one at a time. Ramirez gave me the all clear, saying he hadn't seen anything unusual. Part of me wanted to ask him to walk me to my car, but my pride wouldn't let me. I was a grown man, for crying out loud. I could walk 50 yards to the parking lot. As I stepped out into the cool evening air, I tried to shake off the fear that had been building all afternoon. It was ridiculous, I told myself. We'd all been spooked over nothing. A deer or something jumping by the window. Something completely natural. I was about halfway to my car when I heard footsteps. Heavy, rapid footsteps coming from the direction of the forest. And they were getting closer, fast. I broke into a run, yanking my keys from my pocket. The footsteps got louder, faster. I could hear something breathing now, heavy, and more like an animal than a man. The hair on the back of my neck stood up, and I swear I felt hot breath on me. I reached my car and practically dove inside, slamming the door shut and hitting the lock button. When the engine roared to life, I looked in the rear view. For a moment, I saw nothing but the empty parking lot. But then, there was movement that caught my eye. A massive shape, 7 or 8 feet tall, stepping out from behind a tree. In the fading light, I could make out shaggy fur, long arms that nearly reached the ground, and eyes that glowed with an eerie yellowish light. But that's all I could make out. I watched it take a single step, and that was all I needed to see. I floored it, tires squealing as I peeled out of that parking lot. I didn't slow down until I was miles away, my heart pounding so hard I thought I was going to pass out behind the wheel. When I came back the next day, I expected the whole school to be talking about what happened. You know the way kids gossip and spread rumors. But there was nothing. The kids from detention were subdued. They even avoided eye contact with me. They didn't speak a word about that night. I've never seen anything like it since then, thank goodness. After a while of being terrified to walk to my car at night, I finally convinced myself it was just a bear. But I know that's a lie. I drove a bus from Last Light 32. In my late 20s, I suffered an injury at my old factory job that left me only able to work jobs where I could sit. I considered becoming a trucker because office jobs weren't really for me. And I eventually settled for a bus driving gig, which I've been doing for 2 decades now. Over the course of that time, you'd think I'd seen it all. Unruly kids, crazy parents, the occasional wild animal on the road. But this encounter was something else. The elementary school was the last stop on my afternoon route. A nice little school, kind of tucked away at the edge of town. It was a brick building, with a big oak tree out front. The whole Norman Rockwell deal. But there'd always been something off about the place. That school, for some reason or another, always set off that whole feeling of being watched thing. And I mean it, every single time I pulled up. The first sighting was back in 2019. It was a nice, cool afternoon. I pulled up to the school like usual, but something caught my eye. There was a girl standing by the oak tree. She seemed to be about 8 or 9 years old. She was wearing this old-fashioned dress, like something out of the Little House on the Prairie. Now that's not too odd on its own. Kids wear all sorts of things these days, and at school you can never tell if it's for some sort of after-school activity. But as I watched, she faded away. There 1 second, and over the course of a moment, she was gone. I rubbed my eyes and blinked hard, convinced I was seeing things. And when I looked again, there was nothing there, just falling leaves where she'd been standing. I chalked it up to being tired. A long day, you know. But then it happened again only a week later. This time I saw a boy. He was sitting on the steps of the school, head in his hands like he'd been crying. But when the other kids started to come out, he looked up. And his face, I'll never forget. It was all blurry, like a photoshopped image or an out-of-focus photograph. And just like the girl, he also vanished. I was definitely freaked out then. I'm not the kind of guy who believes in ghosts or the paranormal. But 2 strange events, practically back-to-back, that's a bit much for a coincidence. More incidents kept happening too, always when I was picking up kids from that elementary school. Sometimes it could be just a fleeting glimpse of someone who shouldn't be there. A woman wearing clothes from the 1950s walking into the building. A man in an old-timey suit standing at a window that I knew for a fact had been empty a second ago. And it wasn't just visual stuff either. Sometimes I'd hear things. One day I was a bit early, so I had to sit and wait in the bus with the engine off. Suddenly I heard this music. Not like someone's radio or anything, but honest-to-God orchestral music. It sounded like it was coming from inside the school, but it had this weird, tinny quality to it, like an old record player. When I saw one of the teachers walk around outside, I leaned out and asked, "Hey, was there some kind of concert at the school today?" She looked at me with a raised eyebrow, saying that there hadn't been any music, and besides, the school didn't even have an orchestra. The worst incident, though, was about 6 months back. It was a really rainy day, water coming down really hard. I pulled up to the school, wipers going full blast. As kids started to file out, I noticed something in my side mirror. There was a figure standing behind the bus, just at the edge of my vision. This figure was tall, taller than a kid, and even a bit taller than any of the faculty I knew about. I then turned in my seat to get a better look. But by then, the figure was gone. I turned to my mirror, and there it was still, only it was closer, much closer. I could make out details now. The figure wore a long dark coat, and its face was hidden by a wide-brimmed hat pulled down low. They were giving me some bad vibes. I was so focused on this thing that I could barely hear the kids chattering as they got on. I looked behind me and then back in the mirror. Every time I did that, the figure would be closer. It never actually moved or animated in some way that I could see, but it was always nearer when I looked back in the mirror. Just as the last kid was about to step on, I saw the figure finally move to reach out a hand, a very pale hand. I slammed the door shut and took off, probably faster than I should have. In my mirror, I saw the figure standing in the middle of the road, hand still outstretched, but thankfully it didn't take long for it to be out of sight. This was my longtime career, I wasn't about to quit because of some supposed ghosts, so I endured it, but I was starting to pay more attention, noticing things I didn't before, like the way the temperature always seemed to drop a few degrees when I got close to the school, even on the hottest days, or how sometimes, just for a split second, the school itself looked a bit different from afar, older or run down. It was always just a glance when I would see this, and when I looked back or got closer, nothing would be out of place. And the kids never seemed to notice. If they did, they didn't say anything. But I swear on occasion I would catch one of them looking around, nervously, as they got on. Eventually, I had the idea to look into the history of the school. That elementary school wasn't the first school to stand on that spot. Back in the 1800s, there was a one-room schoolhouse there. Unfortunately, it burned down, with the teacher and some students still inside. They rebuilt, but that school was torn down in the 1950s to make way for the current building. I did also find out that a janitor disappeared in the 1970s. Kind of creepy. He went to work one day and never came home. In fact, they found his car in the parking lot still, keys in the ignition, but no trace of him. I'm not saying this proves anything, but it definitely makes you think. That's a lot of history for a building like that. I wonder how much of it stuck around. I wonder how much of it I've been seeing. Due to some recent success, I'm set to retire next year. I'll be hanging up my bus keys for good. Part of me is relieved. No more weird sightings. No more feeling like I'm going to be watched every time I drive by that school. But I am worried. Will the next driver see the same things I saw? And if they do, I hope they stay safe and keep their eyes open. Thanks for tuning in to Tales from the Break Room, the home of the scariest true work stories. If you want to hear your story narrated by me, send it to me at eeriecast.com/submit. We pay 5 cents per word for accepted stories. Help us grow by leaving Tales from the Break Room a rating and review on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. And be sure to follow us on your favorite podcast app. Check out eeriecast.com or search for EerieCast on those very same podcast apps to see our other exciting and terrifying podcasts, like Unexplained Encounters, the other show I host, where I read stories with a focus on the supernatural. To get some merch, go to eeriecast.store. And to unlock ad-free episodes of your favorite EerieCast shows and exclusive audiobooks, go to eeriecast.com/plus and consider signing up for EerieCast Plus. You can follow me on Twitter, I guess it's X now, @DarkPrevails. You can also subscribe to me on YouTube, where I deliver the same content. Just look for Darkness Prevails. Good night. I hope we can share another break sometime soon.